As our guy Bogues like to say, we gotta keep an eye on that space.
Yeah.
Pro's fat. Well, welcome to the Trent and Pro podcast. Here's your co-host, Pro and Trent. Shocker, fucking Bogues ain't here as usual, but I will give him this. He has a great excuse. FIBA Hall of Fame induction. We'll go into that in a minute, but we'll just go into why this sort of came about. By me doing this by myself. So texting him about a couple weeks ago with Bogues, and he told me, "Hey, I'm not going to be here, on this particular show." And I was like, I didn't even think about the FIBA thing. I was like, "Oh, shocker!" And then he goes into like a 5 text, fucking, tidal wave of text. "Oh, do it yourself then, blah, 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 blah." And then he puts me and Trent in the 3-way conversation. He's like, "Oh, Trent, date, time, Pro could do it himself, thanks." And then I was like, this motherfucker right here. So I was like, I could let this guy get the best of me, but I ain't letting that Benjamin Button lookalike motherfucker get to me. By the way, have you seen Bogues, by the way? Did you see his induction speech to the Hall of Fame? We'll get in that in a minute, but see how fucking great that dude looks. He looks better at, like, however old he is. What? Like, I don't even know how fucking old Bogues is. But, like, at 19, he was 38, remarried, and had a fucking mortgage. Now this guy looks like he's like 19 years old. At age like 40, he looks like he's like 19 years old. But unbelievable. The fucking guy's in first class on his plane right now, sipping champagne, eating shrimp fucking cocktail. And me and Trent are here in the trenches, trying to deliver some basketball to you. So let's get into it. First off, congratulations to our boy Bogues. Bogues gets inducted to the 2025 FIBA Hall of Fame with Pau Gasol, Don Staley, Coach K. Coach K's in like every fucking Hall of Fame, by the way, but Ticha Penicheiro, and, great class. Bogues, again, if I get this wrong, I'm sure Trentlin's going to let me know, but 4-time Olympian for the Boomers, 04, 08, 16, and 20, I believe. Went to University of Utah, averaged 20 and 12, Naismith Player Hall of Fame, was the first pick in the draft in 05, had a 14-year career, averaged 9 and a block and a half, NBA champ with Golden State in 15. And then obviously spent some time with them, a few months in Dallas when he came in the Harrison Barnes trade. But before that, the first time I ever saw Bogues, I was scouting for the Boston Celtics in Thessaloniki, Greece. They sent me to the World Championships in 03 to scout. They had a bunch of teams, great talent there. JJ Barea, Bogues, Roko Jukic, Julian Yee, JJ Barea, some of the Darren Williams were some of the names that were in the event. And it was my first time basically international scouting. And I was there to basically see the American team, Darren Williams and such. And then also, I was going to go see Julian Yee. When I go over there, they tell me like Julian Yee's like 42 years old. It was unbelievable. Like I was like, everybody's saying he's old. Guy's got guy's collecting Social Security and a fucking pension already, but you got to go see this guy from Australia. Bogues is like O'Doyle from fucking Billy Madison. He's a man amongst boys, killing people with his frosted tips and he looks like he should have been in he's like a 50-50 between O'Doyle from Billy Madison and Joe Dirt, just killing guys with his frosted tips, averaging I don't know what he averaged in the final gold medal game there, scored 35 and 14. I think Brad Newley was on that team as well. They just ran through the competition. And he's such an important piece to Australian basketball. Obviously his NBA career was good, it was solid. Injuries had a lot to do with it, but he was he's a good part of that Golden State championship piece, as far as a screen setter, defender, passer, roller out of the short roll, and did a lot. But look, I could always speak a little bit about my interactions with Bogues. Trent, you're more into obviously the Australian basketball part of this. What do you think that Bogues meant to Australian basketball, overall ranking, what he meant to it as far as on the junior level, on the pro level, and all of that?
Yeah, by the way, Pro, absolutely amazing job listing off the accolades there. You've done your research. The only thing, Bogues was not part of the 2020 Olympic team he was meant to be until it got postponed. And unfortunately, because it got delayed that 1 year, he wasn't able to participate, which is a very much a shame. A lot of people believe he had a lot to do with the Boomers getting to that position where they were able to win a bronze medal. But In terms of what
Mhm.
Bogues means to Australian basketball, I know you hate your first pro, but a lot of firsts.
Mhm.
First ever number one pick for
Sure.
us. First ever junior gold medal for the men's basketball team. I think what Bogues could be considered as is more of a trailblazer. He made it a realistic goal for a lot of Australian kids to be able to dream and think that they could actually make the NBA out of Australia. I think before Bogues, it's very few and far between in terms of guys being able to get over there and get drafted, let alone be a number one pick in the NBA draft. So I think in terms of what he was able to do, more than anything, was kind of be a catalyst for this wave of kids that have come through over the last decade, being able to show them the way of being able to be drafted, be a top college player, and still, just being pretty average Australian. When you meet Bogues, it's, if you didn't know anything about him other than the fact that he's 7 feet tall, you wouldn't know that he was a 14-year NBA player. So yeah, I think for him it's more just what he was able to do for this next generation and show us Aussie kids that it's a real possibility you can go play in the NBA one day.
Watching his speech, it's always, I always love watching these things. NBA Hall of Fame, FIBA Hall of Fame. First of all, did you see the people in the stands?
Yeah.
There were the net worth in that fucking place must have been about $8 trillion fucking dollars.
Yeah.
I mean, it was unbelievable. There were like 87 sheiks there, just every big timer in the place was there. It was it was a big time event. But just hearing him speak, and first of all, you don't really see this a lot with any Hall of Fame speech where they go into thanking like every coach that actually helped them along the way. Mentioning all of those people from A to Z was really amazing. And I'm glad he knows the difference between Switzerland and Spain now. That is great that he knows how to use Google. And but it was great just listening to him speak. And even before we started this podcast, when he went into his own podcast about his own journey, it was great to hear it. Just great to hear just all the steps along the way in his career and the people that helped him, the ups and downs, and being pretty honest about the whole situation with growing up Croatian, his family, what they did for him, the floodlights in the backyard, all the sort of the ups and downs of this career, and just trying to develop and work, and the people that help it. And that's great. Like Bogues, I bust his balls a lot, but I'm really glad for him and his family about doing that, and just sort of being able to go through that and experience it. It was really cool to see, and I thought he did it in a pretty good way as far as thanking the right people and just being very humble about about being somebody who could sort of take Australian basketball, leave it a little bit better than what how he found it, and then moving it on to the next generation of people. I thought that was phenomenal. It was a great event, and it was really cool to see.
Yeah, and that's what makes Bogues so special as an athlete, I think, is what you touched on there, Pro, is how humble he is. Like, it's amazing that this guy's done what he's done and is able to be the type of person he is. So I think that reflected really well in the speech for sure.
By the way, we have a special guest, Bobblehead Bogues. So backstory with this, Cuban bought about 300, 400 of these, for how many free throws he was going to make in Dallas. Well, here's the one that he made, the one free throw he made in Dallas. I had to buy this on Craigslist off of Pull My Finger 21 in downtown Dallas. I had to pick it up. He was the only one there. So, I could add lib if you want. That's enough of that space. Pro's fat. Fuck off. All right. So let's get into it. First things first, we got to talk about it. Mavericks gets the first pick in the 2025 draft, Trent. I mean, how about this for them organization? I mean, how much ups and downs can one take? Obviously, we talked to death about the Luka trade. They're like dead in the water from their fan base, media, evaluation of how much the organization is worth. Everything's sort of trending in the wrong direction. And here they come. 1.8% chance they get the top pick. I think Nico Harrison, ownership, and the organization can take a little bit of, take a breath right now, just because now no one's talking about the Luka trade anymore. That's going to be off for a while. I think in today's, landscape of fans and media and influences and things, they just like to see what's going on in front of them right now. And they get the first pick in the draft, Cooper flag all the way. Everybody's excited about it. Gives them a million options of what to do. And it doesn't make Nico a better or worse GM for getting the number one pick. There was not a lot of finagling going on with that. Although they did win the coin flip with the Chicago Bulls to go from 12 to 11, which, ironically enough, the last time they beat the Bulls in a coin flip, they got Luka Doncic in the same draft in that spot. So there was a little bit of history there. Now, their future, look, you keep Cooper Flag. I think Cooper Flag's going to be a really good player. I think he's going to be somebody who could be a multiple-year All-Star, a really good piece. Guy plays so hard, energy, good defender, good athlete, really skilled. Just someone who could really add years to your older team. I don't think he's an elite player. I don't think he's a top 5 or top 10 player, someone who's going to regularly be a top, first team All NBA or second team All NBA, but I think it could be a multiple year All-Star, somebody who could maybe possibly get to that third team All NBA, but he's somebody that could really help you. They're talking about, defense, they're talking about energy. That's what they need in their organization. That's who he is. He's the best player in this year's draft. He's the safest player in this year's draft. He's really good. He's been an elite at every level. And I think it's a no-brainer to draft. Now, it does open up some possibilities for them as far as what they do, going forward. Now, Nico talked about their window is 3 years. So they want to go all in. Now, a lot of media is saying, a lot of sources around the Mavericks organization is saying that they're not going to trade the pick. There's a lot of talk about trying to package that in a deal with Milwaukee for Giannis, and I don't know what's going to happen with that. But I think no one's going to really be upset either way of what they do. They keep the pick, they go forward, or they trade for Giannis, and they sort of have a package. My only thing with that, Trent, is we talk about Giannis a little bit. Is if I'm Milwaukee, I don't think Cooper Flag's enough. Like you could give me, yeah, he's the best player in the draft. That's great. That's exciting. But to trade you multiple MVP winner, obviously a generational talent, I'm not going to trade that up for Cooper Flag and that's it, and expiring deals. For me, if I'm Milwaukee, I'm going to ask for Cooper Flag, the rights to Cooper Flag, Derek Lively, Max Christie, and probably another contract to get it done, multiple picks, and then I'm probably going to PJ Washington will make the deal work. Now, again, if I'm Milwaukee, I'm not just walking into it and say Cooper Flag, I'm there, but Milwaukee's going to have a lot of options. They're going to have Spurs with Castle, Vassell, picks, maybe even Jerry Sochan. Houston's got, Green. They got Jalen Green. They got Şengün, Jabari Smith. Anything sort of on the block there. Golden State with Kuminga, sort of giving some offers there. But number one pick, that's unbelievable, Trent. Have you ever seen anything go from bottom of the bottom, even though they're going to be pretty good when Kyrie comes back and, with AD and the team that they've got coming back. But do you ever see anything go from this low to this high in such a, shorter period of time?
Not that you could directly relate to the situation. I think the closest thing was the Cavs back in 2014 when, I think they got the number one pick in 2011 and then 2014, at the perfect time, they get Wiggins to package for Kevin Love as LeBron returns, I think is the closest thing. But I think the most interesting part about this is, you go back 4 or 5 years to the NBA deciding to flatten the odds overall for the draft, and you look at what the teams that have gotten the number one pick over the last, 4 or 5 years, and how most of the time between, the Pelicans, the Spurs, they weren't the worst teams in the NBA. So it creates opportunities like this where teams who are just missing out on the playoffs or, only a couple seeds away from being a play-in team and now getting these, organization altering picks that you can package or you can draft, a future All-NBA guy. And I think for the Mavericks, this will be a real test for Nico to either kind of stand on business and double down on the Luka trade and flip this pick and try and go out and win in this 3-year window he keeps preaching about, or do you hit the reset button and go, wow, like we have a chance here to build around a new number one guy like we did with Luka? So, like you said, it gives the organization a lot of flexibility, and it'll be super interesting to kind of see, how Nico approaches this next 3 months for the Dallas Mavericks.
You ever saw the movie Draft Day with Kevin Costner?
No.
Right? It's a football movie, American football, where he trades all his picks for the number one pick. He trades them all. And he ends up drafting. So he has like the seventh or eighth pick, and he drafts the guy at 1 that he could have got at 8 just because he believes in it. And then the whole movie is about him trying to like dig himself out of this hole to get these picks back because his coach wants to quit on him, his owner wants to fire him, all this stuff, right? And everyone's killing him because like he could have drafted again the guy that he drafted at 1 at 8, and it was just like everyone's taking advantage of him. And spoiler alert, at the end of the movie, last 3 minutes of the movie, basically, he finagles another draft pick to trade with the team that took all this capital away from him and basically just like sold the farm for him, ends up like getting the picks back. That's basically what it reminded me of. Just someone who was down and out. I mean, a lot of the backlash he was getting was unwarranted. I've said that a million times in the pod, but to go from there to the number one pick, I mean, it takes a lot of pressure off them. I think, look, I like Cooper Flagg. I think he's a safe guy. He's really good. I mean, there's no red flags. I don't think you'll be wanting your money back from him by drafting him. I've seen him live in person at the EYBL, some of the more elite high school kids, and he's just the guy just goes hard and he's just dominates based on that. I don't think he's going to be a dominating NBA player. He's not going to be a Luka like that where you could build around him. I think he's one of those pieces that you add to another core, and I think that that's going to be, just sort of give them a lot more spark. It gives them a lot more flexibility. It gives them a guy who could come in right away and give you, some activity. I think physically he needs to get stronger. Some of those things rookies got to figure out. But how about this, Trent? A little bit of history. Maybe it's a useful, useless deal. Kyrie Irving. This is the 4th team that he's been on that got the number one pick. Cleveland, Boston. Boston ends up trading, remember they got the first pick, they traded down to get Tatum. Yep. Cleveland, they get Wiggins now. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was on Cleveland when they got Anthony Bennett. 4 teams, number one pick. How about that?
I mean, that shores up what Kyrie does post-career. I think whatever team needs him, gets him in the front office to try and get some of that luck rubbing off on their franchise. I think the Utah Jazz could use Kyrie Irving right now. I think they've been the worst team. He could play till he's fit. Washington and Utah are going to have a monumental bidding war for Kyrie Irving, let me tell you. Yeah, for sure.
All right, next piece of business. Really sad. Jason Tatum injures an Achilles tendon. A rupture of his Achilles tendon, and game 4 of the Knicks series. Devastating injury for Boston. I mean, for the NBA, one of the best young players in the NBA, top 5, MVP, candidate for sure. It was one of those things. It was a non-contact. I was texting a couple of friends of mine, and they were like, ankle. I'm like, nah, I don't think so, because there was no real contact on it. And I hope it's not what I think it is. And it was hard to watch, excruciating pain. Left the game in a wheelchair, probably going to lose him I'm no doctor, but probably going to lose him for about 9 to 12 months. Boston's already rumored to be wanting to shed salary. And I think that this is definitely going to, probably accelerate that, for next year. So, they're going to miss him probably for most of 25, 26. New ownership, like I said, buys the team for $6 billion. Next year is going to be a shit show for them for sure. I mean, tough 10 days with him getting hurt, them getting eliminated, and then going forward, they're talking about, shredding salary, Trent. Only 27. Look, career's not over. Modern medicine, what they're doing, his work ethic, his body, I think he'll be able to come back from it. A lot of players have come back from this type of injury, but he got surgery. Surgery was done the next day, and I guess I was listening to Frank Isola and Brian Scalabrine on Sirius XM radio, and they were talking about having surgery the next morning really helps with the rehab process for one reason or another. And so I'm glad that he got it done quickly. He wasn't getting second opinions and having something bad to deal with there. One last thing before I ask you your thoughts on it, Trent. So I guess there was something that said on per NBA.com that players are running 9% more than during the game than they were 10 years ago. So, they're talking about a lot of times with the injuries like this, they're trying to pinpoint why the injuries happen, especially with load management things. People point towards load management being a part of the reason. A part of the reason players are playing early on in their career. They're playing all this AU stuff, a couple of 100 games a year, plus high school, plus all this workout stuff. But a lot of stuff they're saying about the pace of the game and, running 9% more. I don't know, but it's a devastating injury for Boston. And, it's a tough luck for sure. What were your thoughts on it?
I mean, the whole 9% more running and all that, like, I get it to a certain extent, but when you look at Tatum's NBA career and the postseasons he's run since his first or second year in the NBA, he's been playing a lot of basketball over these last 8 or 9 seasons that he's been in the NBA, more so than probably the majority of his class, because they just weren't lucky to get on successful teams like the Boston Celtics. So when you look at that this guy's been playing from, you consider training camp August to June or like April, May every single year for his whole 8-year career. That's a lot of wear and tear on the body. And then you take into consideration 2019 FIBA World Cup, 2024 Olympic Games. Like, this guy is playing a lot of basketball. He's not getting a lot of time off because of how successful he is. And I think this is just, a culmination of all that wear and tear, So I think to kind of point fingers and blame anything is super tough. I think these kids have come up in a very different kind of high school and college system where they're just playing all year round, all the time. And then you take into consideration how much basketball Tatum's already played in his short NBA career at a young age of 27 years old. I think this is just the wear and tear on his body. It didn't look like he really moved or pushed off it too much either. It was really weird to kind of see him go down in the way he did. So hopefully, like, obviously it was a full tear, and him getting surgery the next morning kind of limits how much time away from the game we're going to see. But you never want this sort of thing to happen. But if it is going to happen at this point, I think is better than, happening later in his career where it might have more of an effect. We've seen guys like Kevin Durant at a bit of a riper age than this come back off an Achilles injury and look even better than they did pre the injury stats-wise. So I think he'll be absolutely fine coming back. It'll just be interesting to see how this affects the organization over the next year or two.
Yeah, no, without question. And we'll talk about it after we talk about the Celtics Knicks series. But the closest person that happened to that I knew of was Dwight Powell. I mean, Dwight Powell, all his game is like athleticism and being able to run and screen and cut and lob and defense, and he tore his Achilles. He was back in record time. Part of it is because he had Casey Smith, now the Knicks trainer, working on his rehab. But his work ethic, he's about the same age when it happened, and he came in and up until the last year or two where, obviously his playing time has gone down. Dwight was, catching lobs with no problem. Now he had Luka and that helps. But, I think if you have a work ethic, which he does, I think he'll be back, and, who knows, I think he'll be fine. His work ethic, his trainer, Drew Hanlon, and those guys go hard at it. Drew's going to help him every step of the way with the rehab process and getting him going again. But, with all the doctors and people that Boston employs, his agency employs, I think he's going to be fine. But it's just, it was tough to see for sure.
Yeah, for sure. But like with all that in mind, I can't see this having a great effect on his career. I think at worst we see him kind of come back late next season, even potentially in time for the playoffs, depending on what decision they want to make. So, sure. All the best for his recovery, and hopefully this is a little blimp on his career. It won't affect him too much.
No doubt. Next, let's Michael Jordan to do work for NBC, Trent. This is, besides the NBC going with the old theme music from the 80s, this is in 90s, this is fantastic news. I think Michael's got great insight of the game, without question. Like, as far as players are concerned that talk a lot and talking, with interviews. I think he's got great insight of the game. I think a lot of what he says makes a lot of sense. Now they're not going to use him just because I don't think they're not going to use him a lot. I would think probably special projects where that he'll come in and out, in my opinion anyway. But I think that this is a great part of the game, especially with how NBA media is for sure. With a lot of the players that do media, a lot of them are hot takes people. A lot of them are fake sources people, and they just want to stir things up to get clicks and to get all this they just want to get recognition online, and they just say outlandish stuff. Michael is very well thought out. Being around him, as much as I was, in my career, and just watching him talk throughout his career and what his insights of the game. I think players respect him. A lot of people respect him. I mean, I've been around a lot of big timers, Trent. Like Michael Jordan's a little bit different. For me, like I would want him to interview any player that you want to interview, any top level player, Luka, Jokic, Giannis, Tatum. You go down the line, and I think that he'll get a lot out of them if he wants to. Again, they didn't really specify what he's going to do for the network, but I think anything with him involved in it is going to be pretty good. Again, not overuse. I think when you see these guys too much, it wears off. But with Michael, I think if you use them in the right, I think interviews would be great for him. Just talking about the game, I think his insight on those things will be phenomenal. So, I think it makes sense. I think it's great for the league, especially again where NBA media is going with all this hot takes and just people wanting all this attention. I think it's just a great hire for the network for sure.
Yeah, and I think it brings some credibility to the media space that I think over recent years has kind of dipped a little bit with guys like Perkins and certain individuals, talking crazy. I think bringing a guy like Jordan in, to your point, is going to be great because of his ability to interact with today's stars and kind of demand that respect. So I'm excited. I think in my generation at least, we haven't seen Michael be too public with media or got to hear him talk a lot. And I think that's why projects like The Last Dance were so successful, because we haven't been able to get that insight previously. So I'm super excited to see kind of how NBC choose to use him for next season and what sort of value he's going to bring to that space.
I totally agree. I think what you said about just giving it credibility makes a lot of sense. Well, Trent, a state of Paul Allen is going to start the sale process of the Portland Trailblazers. Paul Allen was a longtime owner since 1988, bought the team, Microsoft exec, billionaire, passed away in 2018. And I thought they were going to sell the team right away after that. They held on. I think his sister Jody runs his estate. He's going to give all the proceeds to philanthropy and things like that. So, I mean, he was a silent owner. You saw him a little bit, but he wasn't really like a trailblazer. He wasn't trying to, no pun intended. But he was just somebody in the background. He let his GM and his coach work. Never really wasn't one of those owners that was, sort of on top of you. They had a lot of success, making the finals run against Detroit and Chicago, in the 90s, and it just was really built that team up pretty good and had a great fan base. I'm not a big fan of Portland itself, but as far as what he did for that organization, putting resources and money into the team, with the organizations, I forgot how much he paid for the team, something like $40 million or something like that. Now with like Phoenix selling for $4 billion, Celtics selling for a record $6 billion, it's interesting what they'll get. My estimation is they'll probably get somewhere in the middle there. He won't get to 6 for sure, but he'll probably, in my opinion, I think they own the arena too. So I would say like 4 to 4.5 billion they'll probably get, but I mean, their organization's sort of going in the right direction. They re-signed, Chauncey Billups. They re-signed Cronin, their GM. They were 36 and 46, but their young players are okay. I wouldn't say they're a doormat by any stretch of the imagination, but it'll be interesting, to see who bids and what's going to go on going forward.
Yeah, he bought the team for $70 million in '88. So
70 million.
you think about the success the Trailblazers have had since then. I think you can commend him on the job he did in terms of running that organization. And I think it's one of those organizations that was hit by some unfortunate luck at times, and overachieved at times. So it'll be interesting to see kind of who puts their hand up to try and put a bid on the team. I've heard rumors of Phil Knight potentially being interested in purchasing the Trailblazers. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what people step up to the plate to try and take control.
Yeah, Knight just said about a day or two ago, maybe a little bit more, said that 5 years ago he was interested. I think he's like 88 now or 87. He said he's not interested as much now, but it'll be interesting to see who's gonna pony up. All right, next one, and this puts the fucking stupidity in stupidity. And it's funny. I was watching the Knicks game. I was watching the Knicks Celtics game. I forgot which game it was it happened in. And Doris Burke was doing the game. And I'm not a huge Doris Burke fan. The only reason, it's just she tries to win her fucking award, like the Academy Award on every statement that she makes. It just gets a little bit much. And trust me, there are a lot of male people who do that too. So it's not just a female thing. So she's a big fan of calling the Knicks the Knickerbockers, right? And I remember when she said it, all right, the New York Knickerbockers. And I'm like, oh, fuck. That sounds too much like something we shouldn't be saying at all, right? And I didn't think much of it. I just thought about it for like 2 seconds. And then all of a sudden, like a day or two later, I get it on my Twitter feed, like viral. Fans are calling for Doris Burke's head, all right? And obviously because of, the racial statement that, the no word that, that nobody should be saying. And it's just fucking stupidity on people to even think that. Doris Burke is a sweetheart of a person, all about the game. She loves her job. Everyone likes her, right? I'm not a fan of her work like that. Sometimes it just gets a little bit much. I usually mute when she's on it. But to think that she would say something like that, as a white person, right? Like, you don't think of the word at all when you're saying words like this. What you're thinking about is not having it sound like anything that will get you in trouble with anything, right? So the average white person just wants to like, you know what? I don't want to get fucking canceled today. And so we're not thinking about that word. We're thinking about, all right, I got to just make sure we're not saying anything that sounds like anything that's going to get us in trouble. And she should probably get fined for actually calling the Knicks Knickerbockers, because nobody should be calling it that. I don't think anyone called the Knicks the Knickerbockers probably since like 1967. And she should just keep it dead. But I just thought it was a stupid thing. And just, again, people trying to like raise awareness about things like this. We got a lot worse things in the world to be worried about, Doris Burke saying the long version of the Knicks. But that's just me, Trent.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's become pretty normalized, I feel, in our society today, unfortunately, where people are hunting. People are looking for people to make mistakes, especially people like Doris Burke, your Stephen A's, anyone of elevated status. It's like, how can we tear this person down? So hopefully nothing comes of it, but, who knows with today's day and age.
Yeah, last thing on this, and again, another fucking thing that I don't even want to talk about, but it is news, so we'll talk about it. Rudy Gobert breaks up with his girlfriend. I think TMZ reported it, mother of his child, his 1-year-old. I think she might even have another on the way, but I'm not sure. Ends the relationship before the playoffs. Details are very, very, like, skeptical. Like, I don't know. There were very small details about, right before the playoffs, he did this. She came out and said something. She's devastated. He said that all the facts aren't out. To me, I don't even want to talk about this because, A, we don't know anything. We just know that they ended this relationship. We don't know any details. Although the shit show world we live in, social media, of course, they're going to give their 2 cents.
And it's interesting the timing of it. Like, if it was such big news and so important, this should have been reported weeks ago. But as soon as the Timberwolves advanced to the Western Conference Finals, all of a sudden this is breaking news. So for me, this looks like a headline grab. Rudy did come out and put onto his story that there was, misinformation out there and cleared the record straight of him kind of defended himself as a father. So I think, it's tough to speculate on this without all the facts, and I'm sure post this postseason we'll get all the information. But until then, I think for anyone to report or speculate or have any kind of opinion on it without all the facts is just silly.
No doubt. All right, so let's get that going. All right, but let's actually talk about some fucking playoff basketball for once. All right, I think it's long enough. Let's get right into it. First series, we'll talk about Minnesota Golden State. Minnesota wins the series 4-1 in Minnesota, 121-110. Behind Randall's 29-8-5. Anthony Edwards put 22 and 12 on Golden State to secure the 4-1 victory to move to the Western Conference Finals. This series, to me, Trent, was mostly about the Steph Curry injury, which really prevented him from playing, all but 13 minutes of the series, which really deflated any chance that Golden State had to be, to making this a series. They didn't have the offensive firepower without him. The off the ball movement, the shooting, just the presence of having him on the court really deflated them. It would have taken a monumental series from Jimmy Butler, Kuminga, Buddy Hield, Podziemski, all of those guys. And I probably fucked up the Pod's last name, but fuck it, I'll just go with it. But it was just too much. Just too much firepower from Minnesota, not enough from Golden State. Look, Kuminga put up 20 a game for the series, but it just wasn't enough. That injury to Curry really was what made them go. And, the combination of, Edwards and Randall was just too much to stop. Rudy size, rolling to the rim, lobs, protecting the rim. It was just too tough. They spread the ball, they moved the ball. Golden State just didn't have enough. Like I said, Kuminga had a good series, but they didn't, he wasn't really efficient in there. Draymond fought. They did everything they could. Jimmy Butler played well. It wasn't enough. And the role players of Minnesota were tough. Conley had 16 on 5 of 7, from threes. Edwards, obviously the best player in the series at 26 and 8 and 6 assists, and Randall with 25, 7 and 7. But I just thought that once that injury happened in game 1 of Curry, Trent, I didn't think they have much of a chance. What'd you think?
Yeah, just completely different basketball team without Steph on the floor. I mean, if you look at, the series beforehand and the spacing that Steph creates, and he allows Pods and Buddy and all these other guys to just be elite because they're just taking, catch and shoot jump shots, really. And you look at the ability for Jimmy to kind of get to his spots without Steph on the floor. It just looked completely different for them. And you could see the scout that Golden State went with was to let Randall beat us. They were like, if we're going to lose to Minnesota, let's let Randall beat us. And he really stepped up and proved that, he can be a number 2 option in a series like this, which I think is really important for Minnesota moving forward. So I think you have to really tip your hat off to Julius in this series. I think he kind of was the difference, because if he doesn't play the way he plays, and played similar to how he played for New York last year, similar numbers like 18, 5 and whatever, I don't know if it's necessarily enough for them to beat Golden State just because of how good Golden State is defensively. But yeah, just stepped up to the plate, was big offensively for them late in games, and allowed Ant to not have as much pressure on him. And then you talk about guys like Jaden McDaniels, Dante DiVincenzo, like they just were way too deep for Golden State in this series without Steph. And it's a shame, because this was going to shape up to be a 6 or 7 game series if Steph is playing.
I totally agree. It just changed the whole complexity of the series. And, the size I thought was a big problem for Golden State. It was too bad about the Curry injury, because I thought that the Denver OKC series was the best one in the playoffs. And this would have really been close to it, in my opinion. Just the way Golden State plays, the Edwards factor, the physicality, both home courts have some energy in it. It was too bad.
Yeah, and it's such a shame, because the first round of the playoffs this year was some of the most elite playoff basketball I've seen in a long time, and it felt like the second round was going to shape up to be more of that. So to see guys like Tatum and Curry go down
Yeah.
is a big shame. But that's you got to be lucky sometimes to win a championship.
Golden State's actually not in terrible shape right now. Usually, a couple years back when they had Clay and all these salaries, plus what they were paying a luxury tax, it's a tough hit. Right now, their projected salary in July is going to be about 171 million. It puts them over the cap but under the tax. Well, what does that do for Golden State? Well, it opens up the full mid-level exception, the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. Mid-level exception is the average salary of every player in the NBA. So that number is at 14 million, which should get them a play. They get the biannual exception, which the NBA gives you every 2 years. They give you 5 million if you're, to go over the cap, but not a taxpayer. So the number one thing that, in my opinion, they have to figure out is what are they going to do with Kuminga. There's a lot of talk about, Kerr not liking him not liking Kerr. It's a lot of horseshit. Either way, I don't care whose fault it is. Like, they got to get on the same page because right now they're an old team, right? They've got some good pieces, but they're an old team. Your best players, that could win you games are, way over 30. So now you got Kuminga, who is your best young asset. All right. And people are going to come for him, right? They're going to sign him to probably the qualifying offer and then make him a free agent. And then he's going to seek out an offer. I don't know what he's going to get, but they got to figure out, is this guy going to be someone who's going to take us, to the next level, or at least take us 5 or 8 years into the future? Or is this a guy we got to get rid of and assign and trade and figure something out? I've talked many times about Kuminga on this pod. I think he's a good player. I think he's a low efficiency, athletic, strong guy that could help you with his physicality and his athleticism playing in the open court. But what Bogut says a lot about playing in the wrong system, I totally agree with. When you're running split action and you're running, synchronized cutting and screening and things like that and reads, that's not his type of game. Right. And I don't know who to compare him to. He reminds me of Kuzma a little bit. He's probably a little stronger than Kuzma, but Kuzma was that athletic wing that, that when the game goes up and down, he could probably get you 18 or 20, struggles in the half court, but he could put up numbers. And I think Kuminga is a player that you probably have to retain depending on what you're going to get. I probably think he's going to get 20 to 25 million a year. That's just my opinion. All right. He is a young player. You can't build around him, but just like anything else, you could add him to this older core, give him more reps. He's got to get more reps. You got to play him. Probably he's got to be a starter, and you got to play him if you're going to really develop him, play him that 32 to 35 minutes because you got to see what you have. All right. And they can get somebody for 14 million and then pay him what they need to pay him to keep him, which won't put him in financial, desperation. So I think that, they've got other good players, most of their core is going to be signed for the next couple of years. Like Butler, Steph, Draymond, they're going to go past next year. I think Butler's got 1 year left, one more, I think next year. And then the other guys are going to extend, at least 2 more years. So you've got your core in there, but you need this extra player. You got to inject some offensive life in your team. You got, Pods, Hield, Moody, Payton, all good players. I think Moody and Payton are going to be free agents. Hield signed for a few more years. So you've got good pieces. You just got to figure out what you're going to do with Kuminga.
Yeah, I just don't think Kuminga fits in Golden State's timeline or system. I think you and Bogut have spoken about it a lot. He's a bit of a ball stopper. He doesn't allow himself to score within the offense. Everything is a high screen and roll action or him going one-on-one with guys. I see Golden State dealing him in a sign and trade situation where they sign him to that offer and deal him later. Because again, you've got a 38-year-old Stephen Curry next year, and Kuminga just isn't on that same timeline as Steph. I don't think he has the ability of a Moody to accept a role and be elite in his role. I think he wants more than that, and as long as that's the case, it just isn't going to work with how Steve Kerr wants the Warriors to play basketball. So I see them dealing him this offseason in probably a sign and trade situation of some sort.
It'd be interesting, Trent. I don't know if it will happen, but imagine if Charlotte dealt them ball if they're just saying, you know what, we've had enough,
Yeah.
and what fucking Golden State gonna do? Kuminga's gonna get you something. I don't think I don't, unless you really pair him up with a couple of, like with every asset and pick you have, I don't think he's gonna get you Giannis, but you never know.
Yeah.
But maybe even like marketing, like if you can get, marketing,
He's been
like if
linked
you
there for
to
before as well, marketing.
yeah, Kessler, if you can get Kessler for rim protection
Yep.
and you can get marketing. And if I'm Utah, why wouldn't I want to do that? Because now I don't have to pay Kessler. Um, you've got your star coming. Well,
Mm.
not your star, but your young player you could build around. And maybe you do that, but maybe they already have that with John Collins, and they're like, we had enough of this,
Yeah.
sort of type of player, like 3-4. I don't know, maybe not. I have no idea, but it'll be interesting to see what they do for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll definitely determine that those last 2-3 years of Steph Curry, Golden State Warriors basketball, and how successful they're going to be. I think it's a very pivotal piece for them to move because, like you said, it's definitely the piece that's going to demand the most value back for them. So it's pretty important for Mike Dunleavy Jr. to get that one right for sure.
No doubt about it. All right, Oklahoma City, Denver. Trent, I thought this series minus the 2 blowouts, 2-7, which is hypocritical, I guess, but I thought it was the best series for me. I thought most of the games besides those 2 were chess matches. I thought it was toughness. I thought really good play from the stars. I thought the stars came out. I thought the role players are really really good. Both teams fought. A lot of the games were close. You had some teams that came back, that were down a little bit and came back. I just thought it was really good. Jokic versus SGA, battle of the MVPs, the MVP candidates. I thought it was great. Oklahoma City finishes them in game 7, 125-93, just in a total blowout. This game was just like, Golden State. It was the Golden State series. It was really marred by the injury to Aaron Gordon, hamstring. 2 minutes to go. Again, we talk about luck. 2 minutes to go in game 6, and he's a big part of their comeback, and he goes ahead and strains his hamstring. I don't know how the motherfucker. I don't know what drugs he had to take to get back into the thing. I don't know how many needles he had to take. But you go from that great of a hamstring to get 11 rebounds in a game 7, even though he wasn't himself. That was a big time toughness deal. You talk about toughness. You talk about bringing it. I've been up and down on Gordon. That is toughness to me. And that was, hey, look, my team needs me. We got almost no chance without me when we come through. I thought it was going to be one of those deals where he comes up and down twice and then subs himself out. He really played hard. But SGA, led the deal with 35, 4 and 3. Jalen Williams, 24, 7 and 5. They're just too much. It was, they kept it close for a little bit, and then the turnovers, 22 turnovers. Oklahoma City just attacks you. They're tough. They move the ball. Jalen Williams gives you something every possession, but SGA gets to any spot he wants, slows the game down. He gives you that same bump, elbow, jump shot, pull up, and just gets to the rim when he wants. Just a brilliant series from him. It was just fun. It was physical. I thought 2 really good coaches going at it. I thought that the games were mostly competitive. I just thought that Oklahoma City just had too much, especially with the Gordon injury. You're like, how can you compete? And the biggest thing I thought for Denver, what happened was just not enough other players stepping up. I thought that, Jamal Murray was okay. I mean, obviously Jokic, he had those games where he was like, for his first 10 from 3. And then he was just sort of, and then when he went to the post and, those other games where he went to the post and just attacked and just played through him around the basket and from 15 to 17 really was the difference maker. I mean, it was just too much for him to deal with. I mean, he had a great series, 28, 14 and 6, I believe, but just not enough people stepping up. Jamal Murray was just inefficient. Porter had the injury to his shoulder, that I think he shot like 25% from 3. No one else really stepped up. I really like Christian Brown. He played hard. He played tough. Strother played well in certain minutes, but they just didn't have enough. And that's a big part of the development going forward, is to get other people that could really step up when when Jokic needs the help, it just wasn't enough. I'll tell you who was a motherfucker in this series was Chet Holmgren.
Mm.
Chet just caught the ball from the wing and just drove you, and you finished at the rim. Took their physicality, didn't back down, had his moments of up and down, but I thought their size was a problem. They just drove Denver. Denver rotated up. And how many times did you see, Holmgren cut to the basket or Hartenstein cut to the basket for lobs or just cuts to the rim and finish? It was just too much for Denver. Denver hung in there. I give them all the credit in the world, but I thought OKC's depth was a huge problem. And it was a great series outside of those two games. It was like it was a great EuroLeague matchup of just two physical teams with two great home courts. And, unfortunately it had to end and somebody had to win.
Yeah, no, I think for Denver to have this go to 7 is so impressive. People forget, although it only happened not so long ago, these guys lost their head coach 3 games out from the playoffs, and you go into the playoffs with some kind of motivation, and then Porter Jr. does his shoulder and plays through 2 series with a shoulder that he can't even lift above 90 degrees, and then you lose Gordon in game 6. It just seemed like they just got worn down throughout these first 2 rounds to the point where Jokic just had too much to kind of do in this series, and to his credit, still got it to a game 7 in somehow, some way, just as a testament to how good that dude is. But to your point, OKC's depth, it's going to be tough for anyone to beat this team just because on any given night, like Jalen Williams throughout the series had some poor shooting nights, but then has 17 points in the second quarter of game 7 and just looks absolutely unbelievable. And you talk about those back doors and those easy baskets that they get. It's just because there's so much attention demanded on the floor defensively by any team because you have to respect every guy out there. You got guys who in Lou Dort, they're lesser 3-point shooters hitting threes. You got Caruso coming off the bench for them. You got guys like Chet Holmgren, Jalen Williams, Shea. It's just like everywhere you look, you have to respect that guy, and it just leads to easy offense for Oklahoma. And then on the defensive end, they're just so elite with Chet and his rim protection. They have 3 or 4 guys that can switch everything on the perimeter. You just look at how difficult it is to beat this OKC team to the point where they're losing games and they're smiling because they're so confident and comfortable knowing that they are going to be able to get this thing done. So unbelievable series. Thank God we had one kind of go the distance in this second round. But again, unfortunate that injuries marred this one a little bit. But very excited to see how this next series between OKC and Minnesota and how Minnesota deal with the same issues Denver faced against this OKC team.
And I think it's great for young teams to face this adversity, face 7-game series, face do or die situations, especially. I mean, it was at home, and statistically the home team wins in so many of these games, but it was a battle for a little bit. I mean, I think Denver took like a 10-point lead early and they just didn't have enough, but it's great for young teams, young players that are trying to push past certain things. I don't want a blanket statement or anything. A lot of times when teams are young, everybody just wants to jump. They're not going to win. They're not going to win. Now, I had Denver winning, but like to me, I think these situations are great for teams to go through because it shows how much backbone you have. And those guys are not afraid. And yeah, it was great to watch. And I'm looking forward to seeing them in the conference final, and we'll talk about the Minnesota series with them, at the end of the pod. But yeah, it's going to be a fun one. All right, so what's up for Denver, Trent? So I think the first thing they have to do is they got to find who the head coach is going to be, and then they got to get a GM. To me, I think Adam should get the job. I think he did a good job. I mean, guy who's never a head coach before. He gets thrown into playoffs. He's in like 2 game 7s already. I thought he did a really good job. I thought he carried himself really well. I thought his presence was better than I thought it was going to be. Jokic was firing at him. You could see during the game, he didn't really back down from that. And I thought that he was really impressive with how he handled a lot of this. So I think that Adam ends their deal. I think for them, you don't have to break the bank for him either, which I think they really like because they, historically, they don't really like to pay people a lot of money. So I think that's a perfect guy for them. He's going to want the job. He's not going to try to get the moon, for you to sign him. So I think you're good there. And I think that he's a solid coach. He knows what he's doing. He's been around the NBA a lot. I think that's great. A GM, I have no fucking idea. Pick Santa Claus. I fucking could care less who's going to be the GM of that team. All right. So right now they got $200 million. All right. They got $200 million in projected salary in July. That puts them at the first apron, but not the second. Westbrook's their only notable free agent that's available. I thought Westbrook was good for them. He gave him a lot of energy. He's got his ups and his downs. He's got his plus. He goes at you hard. He's always going to attack. He's got experience. The down of him is you don't know the shooting and the decision making, because he got all those assists in his career, but I don't think he's like a playmaker. I think he knows how to get assists, and that's not a knock. There's different types of point guards out there, and I think he's more of an attacking guy that could score than a real point. But anyway, they got to deal with what they're going to do there. Since they don't really have a lot of money, I don't think that they got his bird rights because he hasn't been there long enough, but I'm not sure about that. Gordon's got a player option for $24 million, and they'll probably I would think they're gonna sign him long term. They need stronger consistency as that fourth option. All right, right now, obviously, Jokic and Jamal Murray. Porter, I don't know. I mean, Porter's been good. I give him a lot of shit, probably because of his contract. But look, he played tough. He tried. He gave him almost nothing in this playoff series because of the injury. But he's still a little bit of a piece. No one's trading you anything for him, so you got to keep him. I think that, I think Christian Brown has played probably very consistent in that third or fourth option, which is great. Now Strother, Watson, those guys got to get better, offensively, because as you see in the playoffs, shot making so huge, and they need to up that around Jokic. They got cutters, they play hard. It was a good team to watch, but they need more consistency of guys who can knock down shots and score baskets, because when Jokic is getting double, triple team like they were, with them throughout any series, someone else is going to have to step up consistently, not just for one game. So I think that's going to be a problem. So they gotta figure that out. They got most of their players and team intact. They just got to figure out now how they're going to acquire that with limited financial options.
I think it's tricky, man. I'd be interested. Do you think this core, as it stands, there's not a lot of flexibility with what they can do in terms of cap space as well as moving guys? I don't think Jamal Murray demands a lot of value on the trade market. You said the same about Michael Porter Jr. Can this core win Denver another championship?
It could bring them close, Trent. And the problem is, and I've been around a lot of these things and study them. The problem is, if you start dealing guys, and like you said with Jamal Murray, I don't think Jamal Murray's getting you great players in return. He might be able to get you like a good player, a pick or two. So nothing that's going to be groundbreaking. And I think when you have this team that's together, you try to, and this is where it's tricky as a GM. You need to keep your core one or two players, your superstars. And then you got to keep on trading and moving those other pieces to get you other pieces. You saw it happen with the Celtics for years, with Red Auerbach. You saw it with the Bulls. You saw it with the Pistons. You saw it with, the Lakers when they tried to make moves like that. The problem is sometimes your pieces dry up. Two reasons they dry up. They dry up because they get, you just keep trading, and those players become too old, or you pay them too much based on like a little bit of success, and then you can't trade them to get anything else. So I think with Denver, Trent, you got Jokic, then you got a lot of good pieces around Jokic, but unless you combine them, I don't think you're doing anything with Porter. All right, so Porter I think he's radioactive.
Yeah.
He's a Chernobyl of contracts, in my opinion. I don't think you're going to really get a lot in the trade market for him. Maybe you can get Zach LaVine or something. But the other guys, Gordon, you package like Gordon and Brown, you'll get something. Gordon and Watson might be able to get you. But again, I think you ride this out, and if Jokic could stay injury-free, knock on wood, and then I think this team could still try to get to another level. I'll tell you what, Gordon plays today at 100%. That might have been a little bit of a different ending for today.
And I agree. I think you keep Gordon and Jokic moving forward, but the clock is ticking because Jokic, I think, is going to be patient and ride this out with the Denver organization, having already brought a chip to Denver. But there's only so much time that he's going to be patient. And I think they risk losing him in the future if they're not able to build a solid foundation around him. I mean, the volatility with the general manager and the coaching situation, I don't think you hit the panic button and you start selling off all your stock, but I think there has to be some urgency in how they build this team moving forward. I think losing guys like KCP, losing guys like Bruce Brown, who were pivotal parts of that championship, were mistakes by the front office, and now it feels like they're playing catch up to try and replace those guys and just haven't been able to do so. And like you said, you get unlucky sometimes with a hamstring strain or a shoulder injury, but they still just didn't feel like they had enough, even with those pieces healthy, to beat the top teams in the West. So I think this free agency and the next two free agencies for them will be very important moving forward for the Denver organization.
Without question. And look, I understand look, we don't run teams, we don't pay all this, although they own like 18 fucking sports teams that that family that runs the Denver Nuggets. So it's not like they're short of money. But look, we with the aprons, you don't want to get into certain money deals where it really limits what you can do, and then you got to pay that big tax bill. So I get it, but those, like, if you want to be a championship team, those small little deals, like keeping Bruce Brown, like keeping Green, like keeping KCP, those things really hurt your team, going forward as far as their depth and ability to make moves.
Yep.
Then you start having to keep those guys away, and then these other guys got to step up. Look, it really helps Brown, not having those guys because he got more minutes. It really helped Watson. Those two guys I think are really good players going forward. I think Watson could be a Dorian Finney-Smith part 2.
Yep.
And I think Brown just plays hard. He could be a Caruso type with probably more offense, because he plays really well defensively, gives you energy, heart, toughness. So it'll be an interesting deal for sure. So, yeah, we'll see what happens, man. The NBA is never a dull fucking moment with this stuff. Pacers, Cavs. Pacers close it out. Game 5, 114-105, advance to Eastern Conference Finals. I just thought, Trent, that Pacers wanted it more. They had, especially in this game, they just had play with heart. They're unselfish. They attack you. Look, they're not a good defensive team, but they pick you up full court and they force you into fatigue and making mistakes. And I think that that's what they did. And they attacked Cleveland. Cleveland didn't really have an answer for it. And I think it really put them on their heels most of the series. Now, look, they had injuries. Pacers punched them in the face for the first couple of games. They had injuries, but I just thought that I didn't really see a lot out of this Cavs team. I really didn't. With the Pacers, they're so deep. Again, no superstar on the whole team. They just got all these players that know how to play, and they just attack you. They can shoot the ball. They play the way they know how to play. They don't try to, a lot of times in these series, especially when things get tight, you see players going off on their own and doing their own thing, going rogue. No pun intended, folks. But this team, they just have all these guys that attack you. All the guards, Mathurin, Halliburton, got Turner doing his thing. You've got all these players that just really could hurt you from three. They can drive you. They were just banged up, and it just seemed like they didn't want any of it. Like Halliburton played such a good game, 31 and 8 and 6, 6 for 10 for 3, had elite confidence. Sometimes he doesn't play with enough confidence, in my opinion. And then the shot doesn't fall, and then he just sort of shuts down. I thought he really played well. I thought he was a big time difference maker for them. Siakam was big, 21, 8 and 5. They just have so many weapons, Trent. And I think after they got the Siakam trade a year or two ago, I think figuring that out and then figuring out all these other players, they just one after another, and they know each other, and they play this style that nobody wants to play against. They speed you up, they make threes. They're not great defensively, but again, they just force you into tough deals. And I just think that the star power for Cleveland just didn't play well enough. I know that they were banged up. I know Mitchell was banged up. Garland was banged up, but and Donovan, look, and Mitchell, to his credit, 34 points a game in the series. That was huge. Mobley at times was good with his size. I thought Mobley Allen was good with their size and length and things like that. But Mitchell, look, when you suit up in the playoffs, and you just get judged on these types of moments, these closeout games. If you put your jersey on, I don't care if you got a broken leg, I don't care if you got a cold or anything in between. You're going to be judged on how you step up in these moments. I'm not saying that Mitchell's anything less of a player for not doing that, but in the playoffs, if you want to be great in this league, all right, and being great doesn't mean media loves you, doesn't mean how much money you get. True greatness is, are you ready to compete, give it your all, and actually have the end result? And that's what you get judged on. And he didn't have it. I know he was hurt. He was banged up. He tried to go, but this is where you're judged. And I think that in these games, this inconsistency that he has in the playoffs, it's unfair in some instances, but that's how you're judged. And I just don't think because he's the leader of this team. He's their best player. He's got to be better than 24% from 3-point line over a series. They needed him to be their Michael Jordan, and he played well. Don't get me wrong; he was averaging 41 a game at some point of the series, but he just didn't give enough. All the credit to Rick Carlisle, his staff, his team. Those guys played great. They're entertaining. Again, everybody writes them off, and they forget that last year made the conference finals. And they just beat the shit out of people. It's going to be interesting seeing them against the Knicks in the conference final.
Absolutely, and it's not a shot against Mitchell by any means, I don't think. I think this series became tougher for him as guys like Garland and them go out because the focus defensively obviously goes onto him. But when you look at his track record, this isn't the first time he's been a number one seed going into the playoffs and not been able to deliver. You look back at his days in Utah, he was a much younger player, I understand that, but it's the same kind of narrative where he's not able to deliver in these bigger moments. And I think when you are trying to become the player he is trying to become and you get compared to your Dwayne Wades and these all-time shooting guards, if you aren't able to deliver in the playoffs at this level, then I think that the rhetoric is deserved. And you look at how he played throughout the whole year versus how he's played in these playoffs. Yes, he had one or two big games, but not being able to do that consistently across a series is a fair knock. And I think just watching Cleveland last year and this year, when you slow the game down and you get into these 7-game series and teams are just beating the Cavaliers up. They just don't respond well. Jarrett Allen can shy away from contact at times. Mobley at times just looks underdeveloped physically going against some of these stronger guys. And to your point, the Pacers is just built up of these overrated guys that don't have big name or big contracts or anything like that, but they're going to play harder than you. You look at your TJ McConnells, you look at your Andrew Nambards, you look at Naismith, like all guys who aren't big name players, and if you spoke to your average NBA fan, they wouldn't know who they are, but they're going to play harder than you both offensively and defensively. And I just think the pace that the Pacers played at was just too overwhelming for the Cavaliers at times. And for you to be a number one seed going up against a number 4 seed and get knocked out in 5 games despite injuries or whatever the case may be, I just think is unacceptable. And I think if this team wants to be a serious contender in the East moving forward, I think they need to have a hard look in the mirror and think about the toughness and just the intensity they play with. I don't think it's a lack of skill. I don't think it's a lack of coaching or anything like that. It really just felt like at times the Pacers wanted it more, and it can't come down to effort in a series like this when you're the number 1 seed.
I speak about it all the time, Trent, about players stepping up. Everybody complains. Most players, I would say 90% of players complain about where they're at. They think they could be better. Coach ain't giving them enough, not enough people sort of supporting them. And when you have to step up in these types of situations, all right, and I'm not even talking about Mitchell. I'm talking about role players. I'm talking about when Mitchell doesn't have it. Who's that next guy? Look, it's funny. They led the league. I think they were the best team offensively in basketball. I could be wrong on that. I'm almost positive they led the league in scoring. And you look at them and you're like, how the fuck do they score? Like at times, you get Allen, running the floor, rolling hard. You got Mobley doing his thing, post ups and short rolls, and you got obviously Garland and Mitchell doing their thing. Ty Jerome's one of the best underrated shooters in the league. You get all these guys, Struz, but it's just funny, like you said, when it goes half court, they really have a hard time scoring, and they, look at and Indiana's got the perfect formula for success. Players that are over themselves, all right, in the sense that they're over their ego for the most part, right? They just want to win. They attack you, they attack first, they play hard as fuck, all right? They're going to push you offensively, push the ball, move the ball. They're not going to hold it. They're going to drive it, attack the rim, force two on the ball, kick to a shooter, make extra passes. That's how basketball's played. Rick Carlisle, as much as I don't like him and he doesn't like me, I will say it till my dying day. The guy's the smartest offensive coach I've ever been around. It's not even close. And what this is this is part of him, like his sort of mad scientist brain of offensive basketball, of how the game should be played. Attack you, attack the rim, force two on the ball, kick to an open player, play hard, gritty. Defensively, they give you effort. They're not great at it, but they give you effort. And that's tough to play against. And Cleveland just wasn't ready. Look, Cleveland's got an elite coach in Kenny Atkinson. They got good players. They just got to figure out this shit's going to get hard. And when it gets hard, you can't just shy away from it. You got to continue to make it hard on you and push through it a little more. And look, they were the number one seed in the East. They had all the success. It doesn't really shy away from that, but they got to understand, especially with Mobley and Allen, they got to know this shit ain't going to be easy.
Yeah, and these might be the small slip-ups before success. Jordan and countless others in the East have been knocked out first round, and it's taken several years for them to figure it out. But for there just to be such a disparity from them being the number one offensive team in the league to getting into the playoffs, and you're just wondering, what's going on in these half-court sets where they're getting right down to the end of the 24 shot clocks and taking step-back threes between Strus and Wade and Mitchell. It just didn't seem like there was any continuity, which for a number one seed with the best offense in the league, it's just hard to believe.
No doubt. All right, so what's next for Cleveland? So most of their core, Mitchell, Garland, Allen, Mobley, Strus, all signed past 2026. They're projected $220 million, which puts them in the second apron. The second apron, you don't have a mid-level exception. You can't really make trades. It's really hard to operate in that, in that second apron, and that's where they're at. But they've got all of their guys signed. They got an elite coach. They play hard. They're well coached. You got Mitchell and Garland. You got size. You've got all this thing going. All right, they're a good rebounding team. They got a little unlucky with injuries, but we talked about they got to get tough and they got to figure things out. But with their salary issues, as far as what they can do, it'll be an interesting deal. I think that, look, when you underachieve in the playoffs, you got to look yourself in the mirror, like you said, Trent, 1,000%. All right, 1,000%. You got to look yourself in the mirror. What can we do better? And individually, players in the summer, they got to get better at certain things. But they got to continue to fight. They got to continue to be tough. And other players besides Garland and Mitchell got to step up on a consistent basis for them, because guys are going to go down. Guys are going to go down in the playoffs, and that just happens. So it'll be an interesting. Hopefully they learn a lot in the offseason.
Yeah, and this team's set up to be successful for the next 5 to 8 years. It's just up to them to learn from these losses. With the way they went out last year, I expected more from this team. I thought this was an Eastern Conference Finals team. So you just hope they go away this offseason and come back next year learning from these mistakes, and we don't see a repeat of events for the Cavaliers.
Yeah, hopefully you're right. Hopefully you're right. All right, last series, because Bogues right now, I'm hoping he's sitting between two 400-pounders on that fucking plane, to be honest.
Not in first class,
but we
mate.
know yeah, first fucking class, no fucking doubt. One of those sheiks probably got him like Air Force One to fly, so he probably got that. What's that plane they're gonna send to Trump?
That FIBA private jet.
One of those. Yeah, that fucking high-priced motherfucker, Hall of Famer, Coach Bogues, fucking classic. All right, last series. All right, 4-2 Knicks. Bloodbath of a game, Trent. 119-81. You know, this series built around two 20-point blown leads for the Celtics early on. Jason Tatum injury at game 4. Look, Knicks played great. You know, I don't want to take away from anything what Tibbs and, you know, Brunson and those guys did. Yeah, they just attack you, toughness, take control of the game. You know, Brunson averaging, 26 a game for the series. Just a warrior, man. I mean, like I keep saying it, he might go down in history as like the third of, maybe the third best Knick of all time. And just because of the fact, that he's just tough and he puts everything on his back and the guy just produces. It's just great to watch, great overall series for the Knicks. You got Towns, at 26 for Brunson, 20 for Towns, OG Hart and Bridges all averaging 14. But look, the Knicks play the way that they play. They play 7 or 8 guys, large minutes. Everybody fucking complains about it, but they're the most healthy team at the end of the year. They got lucky for sure, but that's what he does. He doesn't change for anybody. Everybody gives Tibbs shit. He's got to get a lot of credit for this, man. They just tore apart Boston. I thought Boston had some heart, in game 5. They battled through after the Tatum injury. Game 5, they come out, they beat New York, and they fought and they attacked. But again, the injury, and then it comes out now. Of course, it comes out after the series that Brown was dealing with a little bit of a tear of his ACL or some cartilage tear that he was dealing with. But I thought that Porzingis, I've been mentioning this for about a month, maybe 6 weeks on the pod. And that virus that he had really sacked him for the series, only averaging about 15 minutes a game and zapped him of any energy that he had. And he was a shell of himself. But not to take away from anything that New York did, but Boston just didn't have enough. Once that injury, those 2 blown leads are one thing, but once that injury happened to Tatum, but that's the thing though, Trent, they're good enough where other people could step up. Pritchard, Hauser, you got White there. You got all these other guys that could step up. I think that was just too, I think the mental block of blowing 2 20-point leads and the Tatum injury was a lot to deal with.
And I think those 2 20-point losses, this series really should have gone 6 or 7 games. Both teams were competitive enough to make it a closer series. I think the Celtics letting those 2 games early slip was a huge knock to their confidence, and you could see that in certain instances, but it's just a testament to the New York defense. I think these guys are the best defensive team left in the playoffs, and they can go on these stretches where they shut down teams for 5 to 8 minutes where they're just unable to score the ball, and you got guys across the board on that team that can get you buckets in bunches, whether it's Cat, whether it's Brunson, Mikal, OG, even Josh Hart at times. It's what you were talking about before. It's that next guy up mentality. If someone doesn't have it on any given night, there's 3 or 4 other guys ready to go, being able to fill it up for them. So I think for the Celtics, you're right. Obviously, the injuries to Tatum, Brown on a bad knee, Porzingis sick as a dog makes things more difficult. But I still just feel like this series should have been closer than it was. But just a testament to the Knicks defense, and I think they're going to be a scary face for the Pacers heading into this next series, just because of the run they've been on. I think them playing the Pistons in the first round was a great way for them to set up these playoffs and give them a taste of the toughness and what it was going to take to win these games. So you go into the Celtics series a bit hardened, ready for the defending champs, and it just seemed like it with those 20-plus point comebacks. So I think for the Knicks, watching Tibbs play those guys up 30, 35 with 5 minutes to go had me nervous, but that's just going to be what Tibbs does. So it'll be interesting to see if these injury-free Knicks last the rest of the playoffs, because I know towards the end of last year's playoffs that guys started getting banged up and were going out with niggles and stuff. You hope that doesn't happen, because I want a good Eastern Conference and Western Conference finals, but this Knicks team has the ability to stop any team on any given night and fill it up in bunches, so they're going to be a tough beat moving forward.
Also, the Knicks didn't have Casey Smith, ex-trainer of the Dallas Mavericks, on their staff last year. So, credit to Casey and all the work he does in keeping those guys healthy. Yeah. And Nico, right. No, thank you, Nico. That's one trade that Nico got right for sure. Nah, I'm always bullshitting, but yeah, without question.
Brunson
But
and the
what's next for the
trainer.
Celt? What's up?
I said Brunson and the trainer. New York Knicks fans have a lot to owe to Nico Harrison.
Without question. And I'll value the trainer a little bit ahead of Brunson, but that's just because Casey Smith's a good friend. But anyway, all right. So what's next for the Celtics? They got to shed salary, man. 231 million in projected salary in July. That means $263 million tax bill. New owner Bill Chisholm just bought that team for $6 billion. All right. The team hasn't been profitable in the last couple of years, which is fucking ridiculous that you're a championship team and you're not really all that profitable. I remember hearing about like Golden State back in the day, and I don't know the exact number, Trent, but they were making like 4 or 5 million a home game in the playoffs based on all the different things. But they got to shed salary. That's sort of what they've been talking about, especially now with the Tatum injury. But that's going to be a little bit tough. Now, I'm wondering, like, does the owner want them to take on expiring deals? And some guys take on expiring deals that they have to take on for one more year, or they're gonna get their brains beaten for one more year. Like when you're in that, usually when you're not like that much of a taxpayer, they allow you to come within 25% of trades. So like if I traded you a player for $40 million, and I could bring back a player worth $30 million, and that trade would be okay. Because they allow you that 25% bump.
Yep.
But now when you're in that second apron, I think they're on the ninth fucking apron, how much money they're paying. But like when they're in that second apron, I don't know if you're allowed to do that. I'm not an expert in the salary cap, but it's going to be tough. So what I'm thinking is, obviously you keep Brown together, you keep Brown and Tatum together, and you keep White, in my opinion. And then chop and block guys, Porzingis, Drew Holiday, Pritchard, maybe, although I'm a big Pritchard fan, maybe even Hauser. And then, like, this is where, as a GM, Trent, it's not all about getting the number one pick and knowing what to do or having all this cap space and deciding you want to sign LeBron James and then pat yourself on the back. Real GMs in this league know how to, like, revolve those contracts around. And sometimes you're like, that's what a lot of times you're like, as a GM, fans don't understand some of the pressures a GM has. Like with Sam Presti trading Harden when he was in Oklahoma City. Well, ownership, from what we were told, ownership says, look, we can't go under the tax. So we got to trade him because, on the extension, we just can't afford it. So sometimes you make these deals and make these changes and people want to shit on the GM. But really, like as a GM, you have a boss. Your boss is your owner. If your owner said, look, we got to shed salary. So, it'll be interesting what Brad Stevens does. One other guy, Trent, they're going to lose is Cornette.
Yep.
Cornette's going to be a free agent. I think Cornette gets in the $8 to $12 million range in free agency minimum. I don't know if he's a great starter, but he's a very good backup.
Yep.
And backups in this league, I would say 8 to 12, 8 to 14 million bucks, and they're not going to be able to pay that. So they're going to lose. They ain't running it back with the rest of these guys. So I think you're going to see a much different Boston team.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to get worse before it gets better for this team, and they're not going to be as competitive as they have been over the last two seasons. I think them re-signing White and Hauser, and I'm pretty sure Tatum's extension kicks in next year, they're going to become a lot more expensive. You have free agents like Al Horford and Cornette. I think you're 100% right about Cornette. His good is gone. I think his value's gone up tremendously with the way he's been able to play over these last two seasons, and they're not just not going to be able to afford him. Al Horford's an interesting one. He's 38 going on 39, whether or not you can get him on a minimum deal or what the go is there, but I think they're still in great position. You have a 27-year-old Jason Tatum, a 28-year-old Jaylen Brown. Yes, you're not going to be competitive as you were last year, but it looks like they're going to have some room next year to kind of make some big decisions on what they want to do moving forward. And I think it's next to impossible to pick between your Drew Holidays, your Peyton Pritchards. They all bring so much to this team. You wish you could keep them all, but they're going to have some pretty tough decisions to make on who they choose to go with moving forward.
Yeah, without question. It'll be tough, but as our guy Bogues like to say, we'll gotta keep an eye on that space. Bro's fat. But anyways. All right, so let's just take a look real quick on both series, Trent. You got Oklahoma City, Minnesota, right? So you've got these two juggernauts going at it. You've got, Anthony Edwards versus SGA. That's going to be a juggernaut for sure. The size of Holmgren and Hartenstein, and versus what they do at Rudy on the floor, and then their physicality. Can he handle both those guys? Because they play a big part of things. Not that Holmgren's this physical player, but he's going to have to help up in a lot of these drives, and they're going to just do the lob thing out of the dunker or cutting, from Hartenstein or Holmgren. So that's going to be interesting. The bench, obviously, you got Case and Wallace, and you got Caruso, you got Wiggins. They didn't use Isaiah Joe. Isaiah Joe phased out like last series, didn't really give, or earlier this series didn't really give much, but it'll be interesting how they sort of, how they sort of deal with that. And I think that, Minnesota is just going to keep attacking you with Edwards and Randall doing their thing, McDaniel shot making and, straight line drives, Gobert with the lobs. Their bench is okay. I don't think it's obviously as good as Oklahoma City. Naz Reid will give you physicality, shot making. Alexander Walker will give you some toughness, some defense. The big Ragu DiVincenzo will give you some activity in transition as well as the shot making. So I expect a really good series. I think it'll be a 6 or 7 game deal. I think it's gonna, I don't think it's gonna be a blowout. I think if anyone's gonna blow out, it's probably gonna be Oklahoma City blowing out Minnesota. But I think it's gonna be a close series. I expect it to go 6 or 7. Right now, obviously, I'm leaning towards Oklahoma City.
I agree. This is a 6 or 7 game series. Both teams match up well. I think they went 2-2 in the regular season. Not sure who or who wasn't playing in those regular season matchups, but I think both teams match up really well with each other. I think you pick OKC in this one just because of their depth and what they're able to do over the course of an entire series. I think if certain guys aren't going, you've got your Jalen Williams, you've got your Chet Holmgrens, you've got these guys you can lean on to produce for you. I look at Minnesota and I struggle to see past and McDaniels, who's going to be that guy for them that's able to step up if things aren't going well for their stars. And I think that's where OKC win this series just through their depth. And I think this is set up to be a 6 or 7 game series, but I just think OKC will get the edge in this one just purely because of the way they're coached, the depth they have offensively and defensively. I just think it will prove too much for Minnesota in the long run.
And that's a great point, Trent, you make about, the next guy stepping up, because I think that Oklahoma City, SGA is obviously the star there. Then you got Jalen Williams, then you got Holmgren, but then you've got other guys that could do different types of things. Hartenstein can get you 18 by just sort of tip-ins and lobs at the rim. Like, he's not a go-to guy, but he's got that little floater in the short roll. He's got other things that he can do. Then you got Wiggins coming off the bench making shots. You got Caruso making shots. You got Dort making shots. Chip England worth his weight in gold there, man. That was probably one of the biggest free agent signings that Oklahoma City ever made, having him as their shooting coach sitting behind the bench. But it'll be an interesting series, very entertaining. You got two really good coaches, Diagno, and Finch, and I think it'll be a very, very entertaining deal to watch for sure.
For sure.
All right, so now we got New York, Indiana. Man, this is going to be a battle. It's a battle against a team that wants to speed you up versus a team that sort of wants to slow you down. And, with Indiana, when we talked about it, their style of play could fuck any team up in this series, any other 3 teams that are left in this series and left in the playoffs. Just the way they play. They're fast, they can shoot. They got guys that don't care. They don't care how good you are, how much money you get paid. They're these guys that just go hard at you. They attack you. They shoot the ball. Halliburton, Nembhard, Mathurin, Siakam. They just Naismith. They just keep coming at you. TJ McConnell attacks you. So they got shot making. They pick you up full court. They're a really good team. They're entertaining. They're well coached. That's one style. Then you got the other style with the Knicks, with Tibbs, that just wants to beat you up. They want to be physical. They obviously have their guy Brunson that sort of runs the show. He's the head of the snake. And then you got other guys like OG and Bridges and Hart. They play their roles. Towns is the second best player. Now, hopefully he's over his hand thing that really limited his shooting in this past series. But, obviously you've got, it's sort of like the Edwards Edwards Randall deal with Towns and Brunson. You got two guys that could hurt you in different ways. Brunson's going to attack you. He's going to get to the rim. He's going to shoot threes. Towns will shoot threes. He could post up inside. I think the game's going to come down to bench too. Like, where New York's not all that deep, but McBride gives you a lot of good stuff off the bench. With his shot making, he just plays at 1,000,000 miles an hour. You got Mitchell Robinson, that ugly ass free throw, but he's tough because he gives them rim protection. He gives them rebounding. It'll be an interesting series to watch. I would think, in my opinion, I would say New York in 6, but that's just, you can't be betting against Brunson too many times. Although you can't bet against Indiana. So, but I think it'll be very entertaining. This thing could go the other way too, but I'm going to have it with New York for 4-2. What do you see?
I see this playing in New York's favor a lot more than it does Indiana's. I think that New York's ability to slow fast-paced teams down, like the Celtics in this last series, is one of their strong points as a defense, and I think it kind of plays into their hands the way the Pacers play offensively. And I think from the regular season games that I was able to catch and the momentum New York currently has, I see this being a 5 or 6 game series for the Knicks. I think the Pacers are unproven. They got to this spot last year and got swept by a very good Celtics team. I'm not saying New York is on that level, but I just think style of play suits New York better in this series. And I think if everyone stays healthy and the teams are as they sit right now, I see the Knicks getting this done in 5 or 6 games.
Yeah, without question. Last thing before we leave, fact or fake news. Bobblehead Bogues is a much better co-host than fucking the real Bogues. I'm going to say fact on top of fucking fact. We need to sign up Bobblehead Bogues for the rest of the way. That other fucking Emirates, that fucking Emirates first class shrimp cocktail eating motherfucker could stay wherever he's at. I like this combination. I know that the pod's going to come to an end soon, but I think this is a good breakout. Bogues could stay in first class. He could stay with his fucking, those fucking cucumbers on his eyes, fucking getting a manicure, pedicure on the plane. I'll take the guys that really want to be there on a daily basis, Trent.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be interesting to see how the fans respond and react to the pod. I'm keen to see it, but hopefully we were able to entertain without the big fella.
He's going to bust our fucking balls that were almost 2 hours, by the way.
Yeah,
that's the first thing.
The power of editing. I wasn't going to bring it up, Pro. I imagine there'll be a lot cut down. I'll have a chat with our editor after this.
I haven't got a fucking check in 5 fucking years doing this, Trent. He could spend a little bit more money on production team, all right? Yeah. Because the salary cap, I ain't Kuminga money, by the way. So, you know what? He could pay a little bit more on the editing side. But, hey, we'll check you guys next week. Look forward to seeing the comments and how bad this fucking pod was or good this pod was, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, bro.
All right, you got it. Later.